All right, Shabbat Shalom and welcome to United Israel World Union. This is our Sabbath morning scripture study. I'm pleased to be here with you. Thanks for joining us. I did want to say before I start the class today to keep the people in Florida in your prayers. It looks like this is going to be a really bad storm, and we know storms here. We know what it's like to go through with it, and so we want to keep them in our prayers. And some of our United Israel folks are in Florida, so we're going to be trying to closely monitor that. I saw that a few people have offered those in Florida, if you do want to get out, head this way. Not that Louisiana is always a safe haven during hurricanes, but you're always welcome here. So we have mattresses. If somebody decided that they could make it here, you're welcome to come here, and we'll find a way to put you up and help you. So please keep that in mind. Just one other thing about hurricanes. Because we're experienced with this, don't play around. If they say leave, leave. And so just let us know if there's anything we can do to help. So last week, I demonstrated and acted out the formal, let's call it the formal severance of two groups that make up what I guess could be called the seed of Abraham, the chosen people, the chosen nation. It was pointed out to me by a friend on Facebook as a reminder, these groups, Ephraim, the northern tribes, and the southern tribes, were somewhat distinct entities before the severance anyway. And that's brought out in various ways throughout the Hebrew Bible. But what I wanted to show last week, that by the time you get to the events of 1 Kings 11 and 12, you have a formal separation. You have remember this happens after King Solomon dies. King Solomon dies, his son Rehoboam takes over as the king, over the southern kingdom, if you will. And Jeroboam, even in the days of Solomon, because he was an industrious young man, the Bible says, was placed in a position of authority and rulership in the north anyway. And so whenever this severance takes place, it's formal. Jeroboam tells the people, after he gets the bad news from Rehoboam that they're not going to make the burden lighter, Jeroboam tells the 10 tribes, we're going to be on our own. You that are staying with the house of David, stay with the house of David, but we're going our own way. In fact, he uses the phrase, to your tents, O Israel. Tend to yourself, house of David. And what happens is, in the north, under Jeroboam, things rapidly deteriorate. I want you to imagine that immediately, under Jeroboam, the north goes into idolatry. Jeroboam sets up idolatrous sites at Dan and Bethel. He erects golden calves and tells the people, behold your gods who brought you out of the land of Egypt. I mean, this is as bad as it gets. And they had ultimately reached such a state of depravity until there was no remedy. From the head to the sole of the foot, putrid sickness infected the northern group. Now, a lot of people miss this distinct mark in time and in the unfolding narrative, but this is a key. And what we want to pick up with today is something that's very important in our ongoing study of the tribes. We are in the 5th of our series, which could last for years. I just don't know yet. But what I want to talk about today is a beginning of, within the series, a beginning exposure or expansion of the idea of exile, dispersion. So I want you to go with me this morning to the book of 1 Kings, chapter 14. Now, this is chronologically, remember we were in 1 Kings chapter 11, chapter 12, and if you read from where we left off last week, I'm going to bring us into chapter 14, but things are really bad. They're as bad as they can get in terms of the behavior of Jeroboam and the northern tribes. So I want to pick up in chapter 14 of 1 Kings, and I want to pick up in verse 15. For Jehovah shall smite Israel. Now this, by the way, we're talking about the northern group. And this is something we have to watch for now, because although there's some tricky places, for the most part, it's very clear who we're talking about if you're watching it closely, if you're carefully reading the text. So verse 15, for Jehovah shall smite Israel as a reed is shaken in the water, and he shall root up Israel out of this good land which he gave to their fathers, and shall scatter them beyond the river. Now this is a key phrase, beyond the river. Because they have made their Asherim, provoking Jehovah to anger. And it goes on and it begins to recount specifically the failures of Jeroboam. But I want you to notice that Jehovah is so over the behavior of the north that he says they're going to be scattered. Jehovah is going to smite Israel and root up Israel out of this good land that he gave to the fathers and scatter them beyond the river. Now notice the reason for this, the reason that Jehovah acts this way towards Israel is because of idolatry. Because they've worshipped Asherim. We're going to be talking about some of the false gods as we work through this system, because or through this study, you will see some similarities in the modern world, I think. If you ever want to do some very enlightening stories, I spend most of my time studying the God Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh of the Hebrew Bible, but if you really want to understand the workings that are going on in the ancient Near East, study these other gods. Study Baal, study the Asherim and the various deities of the ancient Near East, because it's very important. You can't read through the Bible without being exposed and introduced to all these pagan deities. Jehovah, it has reached such a state of moral depravity that there is no remedy. I want you to think about that phrase. Now later the phrase is used of the south, but when the writer of Kings introduces the end of the end, or the beginning of the end, I guess you should say, he says, until there was no remedy. Like there's no fix. It's broken. It's ruined. It's like a garment that is totally ruined. You're not going to wear it. It's like filthy. It's degraded. Now this particular phrase, he shall scatter them beyond the river. I want you to go with me to the book of Joshua, Joshua chapter 24, and I want to pick up on this phrase, beyond the river, because it's central to understanding that the punishment meets the crime. In Joshua 24, Joshua has assembled the elders of Israel, and he's got them all in front of him, and he says in verse 2, Joshua chapter 24, verse 2, Joshua said to all the people, "Thus says Adonai Jehovah." Let me check something here. He says, "Thus says Jehovah Elohei Israel. Thus says Jehovah, the God of Israel, your fathers dwelt on the other side of the river in old time. Terah, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor, and there they served other gods." Now I want to pick up on something that might seem very subtle, but it's something that jumps off the page at me. When Avram is called from his place of origin, and Jehovah says, "Lech lekah," walk for yourself, he brings him from an idolatrous worldview to a place that he'll show him, and notice that it's simply called beyond the river. Now, this, by the way, this crossing over in Hebrew, it's me'ever lanachor, from across the river. This ever is the root of the word Hebrew. So a Hebrew is one who crosses over. So the children of Abraham is the first called Hebrew in Genesis 14. He's the one that crossed over. So he's known among the people of Canaan, as there's the guy who crossed over. He's a sojourner among us. He's not a native of this land. Now, the reason I want to drill down on this is because the implication in 1 Kings 14, 15, and 16, he's going to smite Israel and pluck them up out of the land and scatter them me'ever l'nachor, beyond the river, meaning not on this side. If you want to serve other gods, you see what I'm saying? If you want to serve other gods and you are damned and determined to do so, you won't do it here. You're going back where you came from. The implication is that these people, through the covenants, had been called from a place geographically to another place geographically, from a place spiritually to another place spiritually. And you will not mix the former spiritual associations with your former geographical location. Don't bring that here. You see, because this particular place is set aside as a place of purity. It is referred to as the Holy Land because it is set apart exclusively for the worship of Jehovah in a very pure form. What is not allowed is to bring the practices of other places and other peoples into this land. So the idea is, you want to do that, you got to go back where you came from. If you are going back spiritually to the wrong place, you won't be here physically either. All right. The idea that I want to talk about today is exile, disbursement, and it has to do with banishment as punishment. Banishment as punishment. This is not a new idea. It goes back to the earliest literature that we have in the biblical record. Years ago, when I first started studying Hebrew, my teacher, Johnny Powell, many of you know, he said, at its most basic level, the Bible is the story of departure and return. departure and return. Now, I thought I understood it at the time, but the more I read the stories, it really is. I want you to go with me. We're talking about banishment as punishment. I want you to go with me to Genesis chapter 3. Genesis chapter 3. And I want to pick up in verse 22. Chapter 3, verse 22. Vayomer Elohim, Vayomer Adonai Elohim. And Jehovah, God, said, Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and bad. And now, lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life, and eat and live forever. Therefore, Jehovah Elohim sent him out of the Garden of Eden to till the ground from whence he was taken. So he drove out the man, and he placed the cherubim at the east of the Garden of Eden, and the bright blade of a revolving sword to guard the way to the tree of life. I want to tell you something. Whenever there is banishment for failure to obey, there is often a sword in the story. We're going to look at texts that deal with, he says, in the curse of the law, as it's called, that he'll chase after them with a sword. Adam and Eve are chased out of the garden because they fail to treat as holy and set apart by following the commandments of God the place that is specifically set apart to be holy and sacred and special. Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, is a place where God and man can come together. We get the story, it says, and Jehovah was walking about in the garden in the wind of the day, as it says literally in the Hebrew. Humanity, represented by Adam and Chava, are in the garden, and they're walking in the garden in the midst, and you have this other story where Jehovah joins with them. Now think about this. I believe that according to the biblical narrative, the unfolding stories that we read, what we have is this ideal that God wants to dwell with humans. You think about Exodus 25, verse 8 and 9, where Jehovah's talking to Moses. He says, make for me a mikdash, a holy place, and I will dwell in the midst of my people. So this is the ideal. But let me tell you, that can't happen when sin is in the picture. This place, wherever that place is, which is set apart, must remain set apart and not be mixed with bad. It's got to be holy, W-H-O-L-L-Y, holy good, or holy holy, W-H-O-L-L-Y, H-O-L-Y. Totally holy. Anytime that we have sin come in to a holy place, that one who brings it in must go out. And I'm not even trying to get all spiritually minded on you. I'm just talking about things which are spiritual. Now, by the way, you might think, well, how does this relate to the tribes? I think you should get this by now. But there is a passage in the book of Hosea chapter 6, verse 7, and it says, like Adam, they transgressed the covenant. You see, so the comparison is there. Whenever we're dealing with the exile and the banishment as punishment issue, it goes back to what happened here. And the point being that God changes not, that whenever we get a glimpse of His holiness and His character and the manifestation of His ways, it doesn't veer. So this is the same. Hosea 6:7. Now, there's a sword involved. Now, I want you now to go to chapter 4 of Genesis to sort of drill this down a little bit. And you remember the story in chapter 4, verse 9, we're going to begin. Jehovah said to Cain, "Where is Abel, your brother?" And he said, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And he said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries to me from the ground, and now cursed are you from the earth, which has opened her mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it will not henceforth yield to you her strength. A navanad, a fugitive and a wanderer, you shall be on the earth." And Cain said to Jehovah, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you've driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from your face I will be hidden. And I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth, and it will come to pass that anyone that finds me will slay me." And Jehovah said to Cain, "Therefore whoever slays Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold." And Jehovah set a mark on Cain, lest anyone finding him should smite him. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod to the east of Eden. Now, what does this story have to do with what I'm talking about? It's the same pattern. It's that whenever crime happens in a place where it is forbidden, and by the way, it's forbidden everywhere, but specifically, as the story unfolds, what we get is Cain commits a crime and he is banished. He's sent off, see? He's exiled. And notice very clearly it says that he's sent to the land of Nod. Now, by the way, that word just means wanderer. You know, he's just like, he's sent out as a wanderer. Navanad in Hebrew. A fugitive and a wanderer. Like no place to rest your head. You're on the run. This is the image that you should get. And Cain says, this burden is so great, I don't know if I can bear it. The punishment's heavy. And you know what? He introduces a couple of things here. Number one, he says, "I'm hidden from your face." To be banished from the people, to be banished from a relationship with God, is called in the Hebrew Bible the hiding of the face. Now again, what we get in the story of Cain is sort of a picture, if you will, of all future exiles. To be a fugitive and a wanderer with no home, to be chased out of one's home, and to consider oneself hidden from the face of God. In other words, the opposite is, "Let your face shine upon me." Right? That's the book of Numbers, chapter 6, the priestly blessing. Jehovah bless you and keep you and make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May lift up his face upon you and give you peace. See, that's the image. That's what you want. The opposite is to be hidden from the face of God. This phrase, the hiding of the face, occurs in various configurations more than 30 times in the Hebrew Bible. And it's the ultimate calamity, to be separated from God. The burden of sin is heavy enough, but to know that one is separated from God is too much, right? Any place that is set apart for the dwelling presence of God to meet with humanity must be free of sin. Must be free of sin. God can't dwell in the place, won't dwell, let's say it that way. Now, of special attention is the place, the land, Eretz, Adamah, that we call holy. Go with me to Deuteronomy chapter 9. Deuteronomy chapter 9. All of this is necessary, foundational for the study that we're working on. Go to Deuteronomy 9, and I want to begin in verse 4. Jehovah is speaking. Speak not in your heart, or Moses is speaking on behalf of Jehovah. Speak not in your heart after Jehovah your God has cast them out before thee. He's talking about the inhabitants of the land that he's giving, that God is giving to the children of Israel. Speak not after in your heart after Jehovah your God has cast them out from before you, saying, for my righteousness Jehovah has brought me in to possess this land. And for the wickedness of these nations, Jehovah does drive them out from before thee. Okay? Not for your righteousness or for the uprightness of your heart do you go to possess the land, but on account of the wickedness of these nations, Jehovah your God does drive them out from before you, and that he may perform the word which Jehovah swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Understand, therefore, that Jehovah your God gives you not this good land to possess it for your righteousness, because you are a stiff-necked people. Remember and forget not. That's like a double. Remember, don't forget. How you provoked Jehovah your God to anger in the wilderness from the day you did depart out of the land of Egypt until you came to this place. You've been rebellious against Jehovah. And it goes on. The idea that I want to make is this land is set apart by God as set apart. This land is considered holy. It is to be made behave badly. Bad behavior equals banishment. Not here. Just like it says in 1 Kings 14 that he says that he's going to scatter them beyond the river. You're going back where you came from. If you're going there in your mind and with your worship and with your spiritual attention, you're going there with your feet. He's going to lead them out. Just like he led them in, he's going to lead them out. More aptly described as driving them out. Go with me to Leviticus 18. Vayikra, Leviticus 18. And we're going to start in verse 24. And by the way, while you flip to that, in Deuteronomy 9, he says, look, you're not going in the land because you're righteous. You're going in the land, and I'm giving it to you for two reasons. One, the previous inhabitants of the land behaved badly. They acted lewdly, and I made a promise to the fathers. So you're going in. So don't think you're going in because you don't walk in and say, I'm here because I'm holy. No, you're not. You're stiff-necked. You're here because God gave his word, and the other people were not holy. Now, go be holy, right? So now look at Leviticus 18, verse 24. Defile not yourselves. By the way, this is after a list of prohibitions. Don't do this, don't do that. Sexual immorality, all sorts of things are described in Leviticus 18. defile, verse 24, defile not yourselves in any of these things, for in all these the nations were defiled, which I cast out before you, and the land was defiled. Therefore I do punish its iniquity upon it, and the land vomits out her inhabitants. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, and shall not commit any of these abominations, neither any of your own nation, nor any stranger that sojourns among you. For all these abominations have the men of the land done who were before you, and the land is defiled. And the land vomit not you out also when you defile it, as it is vomited out the nations that were before you. For whoever shall commit any of these abominations, even the persons that commit them shall be cut off from among their people. Therefore shall you keep my ordinances, that you commit not any of these abominable customs which were practiced before you, and that you defile not yourselves in them. I am Jehovah your God. Pretty clear? He says, look, the reason they're cast out, same as Deuteronomy 9, is because they did all these bad things. You don't do these bad things. Notice, though, there is an association that a lot of people don't pay attention to, and it's the importance of the land. Whenever Cain kills Abel, the ground, the blood cries forth out of the ground. It's like the land has a life of its own. And here it says that the land can become defiled. Now, we tend to lose, we don't understand, I think in our day, we've lost this idea of zones of holiness. In the Tanakh, in the Torah, there are associated with the biblical narratives holiness zones. Like different levels of holiness is required. Without it, in other words, you can't go into certain areas without being holy. That's just the requirement. Okay. They were defiled, the land was defiled, and then we get this idea that's very interesting. It's graphic. The land will vomit out the inhabitants. And it doesn't matter who they are. The 7 nations, out. Children of Israel promised this land, promised to the fathers, out. This is what this text tells us. Listen, they were cast out because they did bad. If you do bad, you will be vomited out also. Very graphic. Now, one of the things that I want you to understand, the importance of this, Deuteronomy 11 says that God's eyes are on this land from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. He's watching. Like people who, we should always behave as if God's watching, no matter where you are. But if you're in the Holy Land, you understand that the implication is that when we talk about zones of holiness, that's sort of the holy of holies of the planet. God's eyes are on that land from the beginning to the end. And it's because the land is His. Look at Leviticus 25, please. Chapter 25 and verse 23. The land shall not be sold forever, for the land is mine. Leviticus 25:23. The land is mine. He's talking to Israel. You are strangers and sojourners with me. This is real important. There can be an arrogance or a pomp that says, this land is my land, it's mine, it belongs to me. And what you want to raise your hand and say, if you behave properly. The land is Jehovah's. You are sojourners and strangers. You know why? You are me'ever lanahor. You are from the other side of the river, and if you don't behave, you're going right back there. You go back where you came from. You will not stay in that holy land with bad behavior. The land must not be defiled. Adam defiled the land. He was banished. Cain defiled the land. He's banished, chased out of the presence of God, hidden from the face. The 7 nations chased out because of their behavior. And so too were the people who were chosen to inherit that land. Because Jehovah puts you in the middle of the earth to represent a model of excellence, a model of proper behavior, of righteousness and justice, to be a beacon, a light shining to the darkest of the corners of the globe. And if you will not behave, you're leaving. And that's what happened. There are no exceptions to the rule of righteousness. Once a land or a place is set apart, designated kadosh, holy, holiness zones go into effect. A holiness zone. In violation of holiness and justice and righteousness inevitably leads to chasing out, a hiding of the face, a banishment, a refusal to come back. It doesn't matter. Look, God doesn't change. It doesn't matter if I'm talking about the Garden of Eden or if I'm talking about Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. It doesn't matter. Once the land is set apart, it has to be treated as such. Leviticus 26 lists groupings of positive and negative consequences for the adherence to or the neglect of God's ways. In other words, if in Leviticus 26, it says, if you do these things, blessings will come. You'll be blessed here. These are the blessings. If you don't do these things, if you don't follow the ways of God, here are the negative consequences, positive and negative consequences. We call them blessings and curses. These are the inevitable outcome of your actions. See, all these people who think that faith is not associated with what you do or don't do, they simply have not understood the biblical story. Yeah, they just simply have not. So, but we're not worried about that so much, other than to be worried that people are not knowledgeable. But what we want to know, because people, by the way, Hosea 4:6, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. So it is important. But know this. Actions bring consequences. It is the Bible story, and it's the story of life. People that know life know that consequences are direct result of our actions. So too in the spiritual. As it is in the physical, so too it is in the spiritual. So Leviticus 26 gives blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience. And they build in gravity almost until we get to the final calamity. In other words, by the way, there are a lot more curses than there are blessings. And people have debated, why is that? Some people say, well, somebody, and give them a lot of those, versus positive, because positive, I don't know. All I'm saying is there are a vast amount more of the negative consequences of the curses. Hear this, the blessing and the curse behave similarly. If you do what's right, the blessing will chase you down and overtake you, it says. If you don't do what's right, the curses will chase you down and overtake you. They are personified. Now listen to the final curse. Leviticus 26, I'm going to read verse 32 and following. Leviticus 26. And I will bring the land into desolation, and your enemies who dwell in it shall be astonished at it. And I will scatter you among the heathen, and will draw out a sword after you, and your land shall be desolate, and your cities waste. Then shall the land enjoy her Sabbaths as long as it lies desolate, and you are in your enemy's land. Then shall the land rest and enjoy her Sabbaths. As long as it lies desolate, it shall rest, because it didn't rest in your Sabbaths when you dwelt upon it. And then it goes on and describes even more about that final calamitous. Look, I've stressed for years that the land is more important than what people have recognized. It's not something that you can allegorize. Whenever it talks about the land that God is bringing His people to, you can't put that in the clouds. It's not, we're not talking about heaven. We're talking about, if you want to say heaven, heaven on earth. We're talking about a geographical, real, there's dirt, rocks, trees, streams, animals, people. It's real. The land, we think about the Sabbath, the Sabbath for people. We also think about the Sabbath as a day of rest for the animals. A lot of people just want to make it about people. First of all, people want to make it about today is the day that I don't have to do anything. It's about me, 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 me. You missed it. What does it say in Deuteronomy? You have the Shabbat, you cease, so that your animals, your maidservants, your menservant, it's about people. Sabbath is made for man, but it's not just about you, man. It's about others. And your animals. It's important. Like if you just said, look, I'm going to figure out a way that I don't have to work, but I'm going to work my cattle. No, they have to be off on Shabbat too. Now here's something a lot of people don't recognize. This importance of rest, by the way. Everything within God's cosmos needs rest, and the land does too. There is a Sabbath for the land. It is to lie fallow. A lot of studies have been done on the benefits of this, but that's not my field of expertise, so I leave that to you to look up. But look at, for instance, Leviticus 25, verse 1, the Lord spoke to Moses in Mount Sinai, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come to the land which I give you, then shall the land keep a Sabbath to Jehovah. How's the land keep a Sabbath? The land shall keep a Sabbath to Jehovah. 6 years you shall sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard, gather its fruit, but in the 7th shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath for Jehovah. You shall neither sow your field nor prune your vineyard, that which grows of its own accord of your harvest. You shall not reap, nor gather the grapes of your undressed vine, for it shall be a year of rest for the land. Now, what we learn is that was not adhered to. It was not adhered to, and it led to, at least in part, the exile. It led to the exile because the people weren't following the details, the important details involving the Shabbatot, the Sabbaths. Now, there is, when we read about dispersions, the exiles, there's more than one exile. Not only talking about Adam being exiled and Cain being exiled, but sometimes in Scripture we're talking about the exile of the northern tribes, sometimes the southern. But today I want to look at it in more of a general context so that you get not so much who is this talking about specifically, but what is it that brings about exile? Because what I want to do today is lay down some groundwork for this. Now, I flipped here, you don't have to, but in 2 Chronicles 36, 21, verse 20, those who had escaped from the sword, he carried away into exile to Babylon, where they were servants to him and his sons until the reign of the kingdom of Paras, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had made good her Sabbaths. For as long as she lay desolate, she kept Shabbat to fulfill 70 years. The Babylonian exile, which we'll get into in great detail, the thing about it is it was a predetermined period of time, 70 years. And it was tied to the fact that the people had not kept the Sabbaths as they were supposed to. Everybody's going to rest. You won't be cultivating crops here. You might be growing grapes, but not in this land. That's the idea. You can't violate the way that God has put things into motion. It's going on a pattern. It's got to happen every 7 years. It either happened with you supervising it or without you supervising it, but it's going to happen. Okay, we're going to look at a few more things that the Bible has to say about disobedience bringing exile or banishment as a result of bad behavior. Go with me to the book of Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy chapter 4, Deuteronomy 4, and I want to pick up in verse 25. Deuteronomy 4:25, when you shall beget children and children's children, and you have remained long in the land, and shall deal corruptly and make a carved idol, the likeness of anything, and you shall do evil in the sight of Jehovah your God to provoke him to anger, I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day, that you shall soon utterly perish from off the land into which you go over the Jordan to possess it, and you shall not prolong your days upon it, but shall utterly be destroyed, and Jehovah will scatter you among the nations. And you shall be left few in number among the nations where Jehovah shall lead you. There you shall serve gods, the work of men's hands, wood and stone, which neither see nor hear, nor eat nor smell. But if from there you seek Jehovah, you'll find him. Now, what he's saying, again, is that if you do this idolatry thing, you're out. You'll be scattered among the nations. This is a key phrase. You're going to see it. Left few in number, and then it says, there you will serve gods of wood and stone. Look this phrase up. Look it up. It's a very fascinating study. When I talk about studying the pagan deities and all, this idea of gods of wood and stone. Jeremiah, a lot of the prophets speak very harshly about the idols and how they're futile, they're vanity. You know, it's like Isaiah mocks the makers of the idols. He says, you take a tree, you fashion a god, You use some of the shavings to warm yourself. He's saying, think about that. You're burning some of what you think is a god. It's stupid, basically. But people are bowing to these figurines, if you will. They're doing it today. Around the world. People associate idols with God now. And I don't care what they say. Well, it's just a focal point for my prayers. You get it out. How about that? If you want to be biblical, you can't do that. And people do. The idea in Deuteronomy 4, it says, you'll be scattered. In Hebrew, it's pei vav sadi, dispersed, exiled. By the way, that's the same word that's used in the story of the Tower of Babel. They build the tower to reach to heaven, and ultimately it says that they're scattered abroad. That's what this says is going to happen. Deuteronomy 28. Go with me to Deuteronomy 28, because this is another passage from the Torah which talks about the culminating calamity. The culminating calamity of the transgressions yields this. Chapter 28 of Deuteronomy, verse 63. And it will come to pass that as Jehovah rejoiced over you to do you good and to multiply you, so Jehovah will rejoice over you to destroy you and to annihilate you, and you shall be plucked from off the land into which you go to possess, and Jehovah shall scatter you among all people from one end of the earth to the other, and there you shall serve other gods, which neither you nor your fathers have known, wood and stone. I like the way it rhymes in English, which neither you nor your fathers have known, wood and stone. That's the curse. Now, there are a lot of people who are tracking the tribes, if you will, and they're placing them, in various places, and they have these different ideas. I want you to even know if that's culturally appropriate anymore. Who knows? But you understand, all people, no matter your ethnicity, these tribes have become dispersed and become part of every race on the planet. And look, you're probably not going to find them, maybe now to some degree, but when you're looking for them, find the idols. They love shiny objects. They love praying to fake gods. That's almost how you know who it is. If you're looking for this group of people, you walk around and say, are you an idolater? If they say yes, say, welcome back. I need you to stop that now, but you're probably one of God's people. That's how I know who you are. Stiff-necked idolaters. In other words, we are going to pick up as we work through on clues as to the identity based on proclivity. What is it that these people are inclined or there's a predisposition of these people to behave a certain way. That's how you know them. We're going to show this time and again as we work through the scriptures. Now, some have sought to find specific exiles indicated in the Torah's predictions. In other words, you read Deuteronomy 4, you read Deuteronomy 28, and you go, you hear it talks about they're in ships, they're going back to Egypt. That fits the Babylonian captivity, but not the Assyrian. And okay, I'm not doing that today, that level. What I'm doing is I'm showing you bad boy, bad behavior, you're out. Exile is the result of bad behavior against God's ways in the zone of holiness. You just can't do that here. You can do it, Me'aver la Nahor, the other side of the river where you came from, but you ain't doing it here. You ever have a parent, or as a parent, you say, not in my house. You might do that, but you're not going to do it here. I know I was never told anything like that, but some of you may have been. I've never had to say that. My kids are perfect. Truth is, banishment from the land happens to both groups, to the northern and the southern. There is this idea that comes out of, I don't know what it comes, it doesn't come out of the Bible, that one group maintained its integrity and its holy life and the other group didn't, and so one group ended off worse than the other. And look, that is not biblical at all. And I think both groups, even to this day, are off the track. And the sooner that both groups admit that, the sooner we can get things going back in the right direction. Jeremiah 9, I'm going to go through some text, kind of rapid fire, just to pick up on a few ideas as we work through this. Jeremiah 9, let's go to verse 11. Who is the wise man that may understand this? And who is he to whom the mouth of Jehovah has spoken that he may declare it? Somebody's got to say this. Who is that person that's going to say this? I will make Jerusalem heaps, a den of jackals, and I will make the cities of Judah desolate without inhabitant. I'm sorry, I jumped back up. That's okay. You needed to hear that too. Who is a wise man that may understand this? Who is he to whom the mouth of Jehovah has spoken, that he may declare it? Why does the land perish and is burned up like a wilderness that none pass through? And Jehovah says, because they've forsaken my Torah, which I set before them, and have not obeyed my voice, nor walked therein, but have walked after the stubbornness of their own heart, and after their Baalim, the Baal, the fake gods, as their fathers taught them. Therefore, thus says Jehovah of hosts, the God of Israel, behold, I will feed them, this people, with wormwood, and give them water of gall to drink. You know that where that's coming from? The book of Numbers, chapter 5, the woman suspected of adultery. I will, verse 15, Jeremiah 9, I will scatter them also among the nations whom neither they nor their fathers have known, and I'll send a sword after them till I have consumed them. Pretty clear? Look at Jeremiah 13. Now, look, there's so many passages. I've just picked certain ones that deal with scattering because this is the point I want to make today. What brings it? Where does it put you? Jeremiah 13, verse 18. So the king, say to the king and to the queen mother, humble yourselves, sit down, for your glorious crown has fallen from your head. The cities of the Negev shall be shut up, and none shall open them. Judah shall be carried away captive entirely. It shall be wholly carried away captive. So who's this talking about? This is talking about the exile of the southern kingdoms. The southern kingdom. Now listen, verse 20. Lift up your eyes, behold them that come from the north. Where is the flock that was given you, your beautiful flock? What will you say when he shall punish you? For you have taught them to be your captains as chief over you. Shall not pains take hold of thee as a woman in travail? And if in your heart, why come these things upon them may you also do that are accustomed to do bad? Therefore will I scatter them as stubble that passes away by the wind of the wilderness. That is thy lot, your portion I have measured out to you, says Jehovah. Because you've forgotten me, trusted in falsehood, therefore I strip your skirts about your face, and your shame may be seen. I've seen your adulterings. See, he's talking to harlots. Now, just stick with me. Your neighings, your disgusting harlotry, the abominable idols on the hills in the field. Woe to you, O Jerusalem! Will you not be made clean? How much longer will it be? The idea is that the end is coming. If you go to Ezekiel chapter 12, again, I just have to hit a few of these. Ezekiel 12, he's talking in context to a rebellious house. He tells Ezekiel, son of man, you dwell in the midst of a rebellious house that have eyes to see but don't certain like a play. And then the people are going to say, Ezekiel, what does that mean? And he's going to tell them. Now remember, Ezekiel is told that the people of his day would say, I just love to listen to Ezekiel on Shabbat. His words are so well spoken. He knows the scriptures so well. I love listening to him. His words are like the music, like the song, the beautiful song. But then they don't do what he says. See, we don't want to be the person of beautiful words who can articulate something and it has no effect. Ezekiel's told you're going to go to him and they're going to say, oh, we just love the way he teaches. But they're not going to do anything. So Ezekiel, look at chapter 12, verse 11. Say, I am your sign. As I have done, so it will be done to them. They shall go into exile, into captivity. Now look down at verse 14. I will scatter towards every wind all that were about him to help him and all his troops, and I will draw out a sword after them. Notice, scatter, chase him with the sword. They go together. Just all the way back to the Garden of Eden. And they shall know that I am Jehovah when I shall scatter them among the nations and disperse them in the countries. But I'll leave a few men of them over from the sword, from famine, from pestilence, that they may confess all their abominations among the nations where they come. And they shall know that I am Jehovah. Go quickly, Ezekiel chapter 20. Ezekiel 20, beginning in verse 18. Don't follow the statutes. But I said to their children in the wilderness, don't follow the statutes of your fathers, nor observe their judgments, nor defile yourself with their idols. I'm Jehovah your God. Follow my statutes, keep my judgments, do them, hallow my Sabbaths, and they will be a sign between me and you, that you may know that I am Jehovah your God. But the children rebelled against me. They didn't follow my statutes, nor did they keep my judgments to do them, which if a man do, he may live by them. They profaned my Sabbaths, and I said, I'll pour out my fury upon them to spend my anger against them in the wilderness. Nevertheless, I withdrew my hand and acted for my name's sake, that it should not be profaned in the sight of the nations, in whose sight I brought them out. I lifted my hand to them also in the wilderness, declaring that I would scatter them among the nations and disperse them through the countries, because they had not executed my judgments, but had rejected my statutes, profaned my Sabbaths. Their eyes were after their fathers' idols. Pay attention to this. So I gave them statutes that were not good, and judgments whereby they should not live. And I polluted them by their gifts, and that they caused to pass through the fire all that opened the womb, that I might blight them, that they might know that I am Jehovah. It reached such a state of depravity, he just turns them over, basically. Chapter 22. I've got a few more, so stick with me. Chapter 22, verse 15. I will scatter you among the nations and disperse you in the countries, and will consume the uncleanliness out of you, and you shall be profaned by yourself in the sight of the nations, and you shall know that I am Jehovah. There is a cleansing that will be the result of the expulsion, the exile, the disbursement. It will ultimately bring about a cleansing. But it's bad. It's a hard deal. Now look, there are a lot of other verses. Chapter 34, verse 5 talks about you'll be scattered without a shepherd. Think of all the imagery. Remember in Numbers 27, after God tells Moses, you're not going in, the last recorded words that Moses says to Jehovah that we have, don't let them be like a sheep without shepherd. Give them a shepherd. Numbers 27. Here, Ezekiel 34 describes they're scattered. They don't have a shepherd. Zechariah 13:7. My mind is jumping around in these texts. Think about there. Strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. There are images that are meant to make you say, oh, the sheep, they don't even have a shepherd. How are they going to know where to go? And they're lost. In fact, we read about the bad shepherds that lead them astray. It's another class, but you get the image. Now go to chapter 36 of Ezekiel. Ezekiel 36 and verse 16. And the word of Jehovah came to me, saying, Son of man, when the house of Israel dwelt in their own land, which by the way means they don't anymore, they defiled it by their way and by their doings. Their way was before me as the uncleanness of a menstruous woman. So I poured my fury upon them for the blood that they had shed upon the land, and for their idols which they had defiled it. And I scattered them among the nations, and they were dispersed through the countries according to the way, according to their doings. I judged them. And when they came to the nations into which they came, they profaned my holy name, in that men said of them, These are the people of Jehovah, and they're gone out of his land. But I had concern for my holy name, which the house of Israel had profaned among the nations into which they came. They're scattered. They do bad where they go too. It doesn't change yet. Now go to Zechariah, book of Zechariah, chapter 7. Zechariah 7, verse 11. But they refused to hearken and turned a stubborn shoulder and stopped their ear. Look, they're doing this. They put their fingers in their ears, that they shouldn't hear, and they made their hearts as hard as stone, lest they should hear the Torah and the words which Jehovah of hosts had sent in his spirit by the former prophets. Therefore, a great anger came from Jehovah of hosts, and so when he cried and they would not hear, Jehovah of hosts said, So they shall cry, and I will not hear. But I will scatter them with a storm wind among all the nations whom they know not, and the land shall be desolate after them, so that no man shall pass by or return. Thus they made the pleasant land a desolation. One more passage to get in before I wrap up. Go to Psalm 106. Psalm 106. Verse 26. Psalm 106, verse 26. Therefore he lifted up his hand against them, swearing to overthrow them in the wilderness, to cast out their seed also among the nations, and to scatter them in the lands. Now, this culminating calamity among the curse of the law will be enacted on both houses. Both groups, not simultaneously. The northern kingdom is going first. The southern kingdom will also go. I have always thought of Amos and Hosea being Hosea. Hosea does distinguish between the house of Judah and the house of Israel. But there are times where Hosea is speaking of both, and I think people might miss this. But I want to begin kind of setting up for next week. If you'll go with me to Hosea chapter 1. Hosea chapter 1, and I know the way people read this, because this is what I do. This is what I talk to people about. Hosea chapter 1. The word of Jehovah that came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Yotam, Achaz, Yizkiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. When the Lord Jehovah spoke it first with Hosea, Jehovah said to Hosea, go take to you a wife of harlotry and children of harlotry. Why? Because the land has lewdly gone astray from Jehovah. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Divlaim, who conceived and bore him a son. Jehovah said to him, call his name Yisrael for yet a little while, and I will visit the blood of Yisrael upon the house of Jehu, and will bring the kingdom of the house of Israel to an end. He talks about Hosea is told to marry a harlot and have children of harlotry. Notice, because the land has gone lewdly astray. Now, a lot of times people go, oh, he's talking about, later it's going to say there's a differentiation made, at least in one passage, about Judah. And so people go, well, this is all about Israel. But stick with me. He is warning this people about the dangers of adultery, meaning spiritual adultery, idolatry. He's talking about these people have been cheating on God. Right? This is what it's talking about. There is a warning in chapter 2. Look at verse 4 of Hosea. Contend with your mother, contend, for she is not my wife, nor am I her husband. Listen to this. Let her therefore put away her harlotry out of her sight, and her adulteries from between her breasts, lest I strip her naked and set her as in the day she was born, and make her as a wilderness, set her as dry land. It goes on. It's very, very graphic. But just for time, look at verse 7. Their mother has played the harlot. She who conceived them has acted shamefully. She said, I'm going to go after my lovers who give me bread and water and wool and flax and oil and my drink. Then he says, I'm going to hedge up the way around with thorns. In other words, he's saying, you're going to try to get back in and you can't get back in. Verse 8 says, she will not find her paths. It's like you change the locks on the door. You're going to play a whore, go play a whore. You can't come back in. That's what he says. Chapter 4. I'm just going to blow through a few more of these because I want to get to a perfect place to stop for next week. So stick with me. Chapter 4, verse 9 of Hosea. And it will be like people like priests. I'll punish them for their ways and reward them for their doings. They shall eat and not have enough. They'll commit harlotry and won't increase because they cease to them. They're praying to idols. The spirit, verse 12, for the spirit of harlotry has caused them to err. Think about that. Spirit of harlotry. We're talking from the Tanakh. And they have gone astray lewdly from under their God. I mean, it goes on. This is verse 13. Therefore, your daughters commit harlotry. Your daughter-in-law commits adultery. I will not punish your daughters when they commit harlotry, nor your daughters-in-law, for they themselves go aside with harlots, and they sacrifice with prostitutes. Though you, listen to this, verse 15, though you, Israel, does play the harlot, don't let Judah also be guilty. This is important. See, Israel, you're being a harlot, but Judah, please don't tell me it's so. Et tu, Yehuda? You too? Chapter 5. Hear this, O priest, hearken, O house of Israel, give ear, O house of the king. Yours is a judgment because you've been a snare on Mizpah and spread a net on Tavor. Your apostates are deep dyed in slaughter, and I'm rejected by them all. I know Ephraim and Israel is not hid from me. For now, O Ephraim, you commit harlotry, and Israel is defiled. Their doings will not allow them to return to their God, for the spirit of harlotry is in the midst of them, and they've not known Jehovah. The pride of Israel does testify to his face. Therefore shall Israel and Ephraim stumble in their iniquity. Listen, Judah also shall stumble with them. Uh-oh. Everybody that thought Judah was clean in all this, I'm talking about harlotry against God. They have dealt treacherously, verse 7, against Jehovah, for they've begotten strange children. Now shall a month devour them with their portions. I don't have time to read everything. I'm going to kind of pull things together here. Both groups are charged with infidelity, Judah and Ephraim. Ezekiel 16 and 23 are the most powerful passages which deal with this subject. And in both these passages, it's dealing with the whoredom of the two houses, the two families that God chose to be a model of justice and righteousness in the earth. You two sisters are to be a model of purity, and they're whores. I'm not trying to be profane. I'm just saying this is what Scripture says. You're to be chaste models of what it should be, and you're bad girls. Now look at Ezekiel 23. Ezekiel 23, because this is where I'll tie it together to begin setting the stage for next week. Ezekiel 23. Verse 1. The word of Jehovah came again to me, saying, Son of man, there were two women, the daughters of one mother, and they committed harlotry in Egypt. And they committed harlotry in their youth. There were their breasts pressed. There their virgin teats were handled. The names of them were Aholah the elder and Aholivah her sister, and they were mine. And they bore sons and daughters. Thus were their names. Shomeron, Samaria, is Aholah, and Jerusalem is Aholivah. Aholah played the harlot when she was mine, and you can read this. It's pretty graphic. Aholah means her tent. Aholivah means my tent is in her. The southern kingdom is known as Aholivah. According to Ezekiel, his tent is in Judah. These sisters are bad. It describes, if we were to keep reading in 23, through all the graphic description of the prostitution, that ultimately Aholah, the north, is banished. And I want you to listen to verse 11, Ezekiel 23:11. Her sister Aholivah saw this. She witnessed all of this, and listen, yet she was more corrupt in her inordinate love than she, and in her harlotries more than her sister in her harlotries. It's like if you had these two girls in your town and you're like, man, that girl's bad, and they'd say, yeah, but have you seen her sister? Like two girls. Idolatry is adultery. It's an unseemly thing. It is a cause to be chased away. In 722 BCE, Aholah, the northern girl, is exiled. In 586 BCE, Aholibah, the sister who was even worse, is also chased away. The persistent pleading of prophets to Jehovah's faithless women went unheeded. For their unfaithfulness, they were sent away, chased out of the house. The question is, where did they go? For a period of time, both girls were kicked out of the house. And that's where I leave us today. The house is empty. The harlots are gone. Where did they go? When will they return? How will they come back? When will they come back? How will we recognize them? Join us next week as we pick up on our class on the tribes. Shabbat Shalom. And give us a few minutes and we'll set up for a dialogue for those who have some time to spend with us, to spend a little more time this afternoon.